Hello, friends. Listen closely to this tale of courage, hope, and unexpected connections. Meet Mara, a young woman who has fled a life of pain and loneliness, wandering through harsh wilderness with nothing but a few remnants of her past. Alone, exhausted, and carrying the weight of her past, she stumbles upon a man named Kyo, gravely injured and barely clinging to life. What happens next is a story of compassion, resilience, and the fragile beginnings of trust and friendship that could change both their lives forever. Let's begin the story. The wind drifted across the foothills like a tired ghost, brushing the world with a soft, restless sigh. Dust rose in pale ribbons behind a lone figure walking beneath the shadow of distant peaks. Late autumn had stripped the land bare, leaving the skeletons of trees reaching upward as if begging the heavens for mercy. The woman walked as though she had been on her feet for a lifetime. Her name was Mara. She was 26, yet her posture carried the exhaustion of someone who had lived through too many winters, suffered too many invisible blows. Her boots were cracked, her skirt torn by brambles, and the small satchel over her shoulder felt heavier than stone. Inside were the last remnants of a life she had escaped: a creased hymn book from her mother, a wool shawl frayed by time, and a little journal filled with scraps of herself she had refused to abandon. 3 days earlier, she had fled the house where her hope had slowly suffocated, a place of sharp words and cold silences, where her husband's anger waited in every shadow. That final night, he had struck her with a fury she had not seen before, his mother watching from the doorway with the same disdain she had carried from the start. Mara had waited until they both slept, drunk on anger and cheap whiskey, before she slipped through the creaking door and into the moonlit dark. She ran without breath, without direction, driven by the fragile conviction that somewhere beyond the hills, safety still existed. Now, in the wilderness, she felt both free and terribly small. She paused beneath a cottonwood, clinging stubbornly to the edge of a dry wash. The shade it offered was thin, but it was enough to ease her trembling knees. She drew her legs close, pressing her forehead against them as her breath rasped in her chest. She whispered a prayer she no longer had words for. That was when she heard it. At first, she thought it was the cry of a hawk, sharp and distant. But then it came again, the unmistakable sound of a human voice, strangled and raw with pain. Mara froze. Her whole life had taught her to avoid trouble, to stay quiet, to disappear when danger stirred. But the cry carried something in it, a depth of hurt she could not ignore. Even her fear could not smother the pull inside her ribs. Against every instinct she rose. Her legs trembled as she climbed the incline toward the ridge. The sun's glare forced her eyes to narrow, but she kept going, breath uneven, heart pounding. When she reached the edge of the canyon, she saw him. A man lay crumpled among jagged stones, one arm pinned beneath his body, his shirt darkened with blood along the ribs. His skin carried the warm bronze of the southern tribes, his long black hair tangled with dust and pine needles. He was no one she knew, no one from her world. For an instant, fear pierced her. But then he opened his eyes. Pain clouded them, but they held no threat, only a weary, fragile plea. Something inside her shifted. Mara slid down the slope toward him, gravel slipping beneath her boots, and knelt beside his battered form. "Hold on," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I won't leave you." And for the first time in a long, long while she meant it. The man's breath rasped shallowly, each inhale a fragile thread that looked ready to snap. Mara's hands trembled as she brushed away the dirt clinging to his shoulder. The wound was deep, angry, bleeding, edged with the dust of the canyon floor. She swallowed hard, forcing back the wave of panic that threatened to steal her courage. "You're hurt bad," she murmured. though it was clear he already knew. His eyelids fluttered, his gaze drifting toward her face as if trying to place her in a world that had grown dim. Mara tore a strip from the hem of her skirt, ignoring the sting as the fabric ripped free. Her fingers felt clumsy, yet her determination steadied them. She pressed the cloth to the wound, leaning her weight just enough to stem the flow of blood. The man winced, a low, guttural sound, but he did not pull away. "You're not alone," she whispered, more for herself than for him. The sun dipped slowly behind the canyon's rim, staining the world with the soft gold of approaching dusk. She worked in silence, cleaning the wound with snow melted in her palms. When she finished binding it, her breath shuddered in relief. It was not perfect, far from it, but it was enough to give him a chance. When she looked back at him, she found his eyes open again, dark and searching. He stared at her for a long moment, studying her with an expression she could not decipher. Fear, gratitude, confusion, maybe all of them. Then he parted his lips. "Why, help?" His voice was rough, the words shaped with effort. She hesitated. There were 1,000 answers buried in her chest, but only one found its way out. "Because you're alive," she said softly. "And because no one deserves to die alone." His gaze lowered, as if absorbing the weight of her words. The tension in his body eased slightly. Night crept over them like a soft blanket. The canyon grew colder, the wind sharper. Mara knew he would not survive the night without heat. So she gathered fallen branches, her fingers numb as she struck her flint again and again until a spark caught. Flames rose slowly, casting warm orange light over the stone walls. She sat close to him, feeding the fire, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Shadows flickered across his face, shadows that softened the hard lines of his cheekbones, the sharp angle of his jaw. After a long silence, he spoke again. "Name? Kyo?" Mara's heart tightened at the effort he spent on so few syllables. She touched her hand lightly to her chest. "Mara." He nodded weakly, his eyes closing in acceptance. The quiet between them settled deep, not heavy with fear, but strangely gentle. She watched the stars emerge, one, then another, tiny lanterns pricking the dark sky. Beside her, Kyo's breathing steadied, slow but alive. Mara drifted into uneasy sleep, her body curled near the fire. Each time the cold crept in, she woke to add more wood, glancing at Kyo's rising chest with relief. At dawn, pale light brushed the canyon walls. Mara rubbed the sleep from her eyes and turned toward him. Kyo was awake, and he was watching her, not with suspicion, not with fear, but with something else, recognition, and the faintest spark of trust. The sun's first light barely warmed the canyon floor, but it painted Kyo's face in a soft gold that made him seem less ghost-like than the night before. Mara knelt beside him, brushing ash from her skirt, and offered him a small tin cup filled with melted snow. His hands shook when he reached for it, so she steadied the cup against his lips. "Slow," she whispered. He drank in small, careful sips. Each swallow felt like a victory. When he finished, he let his head rest back against the stone. His eyes, dark as river rock, studied her with a quiet intensity. Mara couldn't tell what he saw, a frightened runaway or simply a woman trying to survive alongside him. She pulled the shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Better?" she asked. Kyo didn't answer at first. Then he lifted a hand, shaking, but deliberate, touching his wounded shoulder lightly. "You help," he said, the words shaped with effort, "still alive." His voice carried no warmth, no smile, but the meaning struck her like an unexpected blessing. "I'm glad," she murmured. The day passed in a slow unfolding. Mara fetched water from a shaded patch of snow and tore more strips from her skirt to replace the blood-soaked bandages. Keo watched her with quiet alertness, offering instruction with gestures. When she fumbled, he whispered a word, sharp, soft, from his own language, and motioned again until she understood. The rasp of his breath eased by afternoon. He could sit upright with help, leaning against the canyon wall. Mara gathered what little food she had left, 2 hard biscuits and a handful of dried berries. She pressed the larger portion into his hand. He pushed it back toward her with a stubborn shake of his head. "You eat," he insisted. She blinked at him, startled. Then she broke the biscuit in half and placed one piece firmly in his palm. "We share," she said. Her voice trembled, but the firmness was real. Something flickered across his face. Respect, perhaps, or simply acknowledgement. He did not argue again. They ate in silence, the sky slowly filling with the soft orange of evening. A weak breeze carried the smell of dust and sun-warmed stone. For the first time in days, Mara felt something close to calm. As the sun slipped behind the western rim, Keo shifted, wincing. He raised his uninjured hand and made a small circle in the dirt, then tapped the center of it. "What is it?" she asked. He repeated the motion. Then, in broken English, he said, "Alone, long." Mara's breath caught. It wasn't a question. It wasn't even a confession. It was simply truth, one she understood all too well. She lowered herself beside him. "Me too." Their eyes met for a fragile heartbeat. No story was shared, no pain spoken aloud. But between them, in the gentle hush of the canyon, something unspoken bridged the space. Recognition, perhaps, or the first stirring of companionship born from shared wounds. When night came, Mara built the fire closer than before, its glow bathing them both in a warm circle of light. Keo watched her from the shadows, his expression unreadable but no longer distant. She lay beside the flames, sleep tugging her eyelids shut, while Keo drifted into his own uneasy rest. For the first time since she'd fled her old life, Mara felt that she wasn't invisible or alone. And in the quiet between two broken lives, the possibility of healing flickered like the firelight, small, fragile, but unmistakably there. The fourth morning arrived wrapped in pale silver, the kind of dawn that made the world feel fragile, as if sunlight might shatter it with a touch. Mara rose stiffly from the cold ground, brushing frost from her shawl. Keo was already awake, watching the sky as though reading something written in the quiet light. His shoulder was still bandaged, but the bleeding had slowed. Mara knelt beside him, checking the cloth gently. He winced only slightly. "Better," she murmured, relieved. He nodded once. "You learn fast." The faintest warmth stirred in her chest. Praise was a foreign thing to her, something she had forgotten the shape of. By midday, Keo tried to stand. "Careful," she urged, stepping close. But he shook his head stubbornly and pushed himself upright. His breath hissed through clenched teeth, yet he remained standing, swaying only once before steadying himself against the canyon wall. Mara hovered beside him, ready to catch him if he fell. But he didn't. With a quiet determination, Keo gestured toward a clump of thin-leafed plants growing between the rocks. He crouched with difficulty, plucked a handful, and held them out to her. "For fever," he said. "Boil, put on wound." She took them with gentle hands, recognizing the trust he offered in such a simple gesture. The day drew on, soft and slow. Mara brewed the herbs into a bitter-smelling paste while Keo rested in the shade. She spread it across his shoulder as he bit down against the sting. The scent filled the air, sharp and earthy. "You've done this before," she said quietly. Keo's gaze drifted past her toward memories she could not see. "My mother. She teach. Before—" The sentence faded. swallowed by silence. Mara didn't press him. She simply nodded, her own heart aching with unspoken ghosts. As dusk approached, they sat near the fire, a small flame flickering against the canyon walls. Keo sharpened a branch with his good hand, carving slow, steady lines. Mara watched him, feeling the heaviness of curiosity pressing against her ribs. "Keo," she whispered, "your family, are they—" Her voice trailed off, not sure she had the right to ask. For a long moment he said nothing. The fire crackled, the shadows deepened. Finally he lowered the half-carved stick. His eyes, dark as storm clouds, lifted to hers. "They gone." The words were simple, but they held an ocean of grief. Mara's breath caught. He continued, his voice low and halting, shaped by memory rather than English. "Soldiers came. Said we help rebels. Not true. We run. They shoot. My wife." His throat tightened. "I hold her. Could not stop blood." Mara felt her heart twist in her chest. The pain in his voice echoed too closely to her own hidden wounds. She reached out, hesitant, then steadier, and set her hand atop his. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Keo did not pull away. His fingers, rough and scarred, curled slowly around hers. For a moment, two lives overflowing with loss met in quiet understanding. There were no promises, no spoken comforts, only the shared space where grief softened into something gentler. When the stars rose, they sat without speaking, their hands still joined. The fire burned low, but warmth lingered between them, fragile yet undeniable. Mara glanced at him, her voice a trembling whisper. "You're not alone anymore." Keo looked at her, truly looked, and nodded once. A movement small but full of meaning. "Neither are you," he said. And for the first time in a long, cold season of her life, Mara believed it. Snow clouds gathered through the night, softening the world with their quiet promise. Mara and Keo rose early, moving slowly, their breaths curling like pale smoke in the frigid air. Keo's shoulder still ached, but he walked now, carefully, steadily, leaning on a carved branch he'd shaped the night before. They left the canyon behind, searching for safer ground. The land opened into low rolling hills where cedars clung stubbornly to the earth. The wind carried a cold bite, urging them onward. By midday, Keo halted suddenly, raising his hand. Mara stopped beside him, heart tightening. He tilted his head, listening. A soft sound drifted through the trees, thin, trembling, almost swallowed by the wind. A cry, not an animal's whimper, a child's. Mara's breath caught as she followed Keo toward a small hollow sheltered beneath a cedar tree. There, curled against the roots, was a little girl no older than 6. Her cheeks were streaked with dirt, her dark hair tangled, her small body trembling in the chill. Tears glistened on her face. "Oh," Mara whispered, her chest tightening painfully. "Sweetheart." The child flinched at the sound, scrambling backward with a frightened gasp. Her wide eyes darted between them, full of animal terror. Keo knelt slowly, lowering himself despite the pain in his shoulder. He spoke softly in his own language, gentle, melodic syllables shaped with the tenderness of a lullaby. The girl's breath hitched. Her gaze locked on him with a flicker of recognition. Hesitation warred with fear. Then she whispered something small and broken in the same tongue. Keo's face softened in a way Mara had never seen. He reached out carefully, and after a long, trembling moment, the child rushed into his arms with a sob. Mara pressed a hand to her mouth, tears stinging behind her eyes. She knelt beside them, smoothing the girl's tangled hair. "What's her name?" she asked softly. Keo brushed a hand over the girl's head. "Leary," he murmured. Then, lower, "Family. Gone." Mara's heart clenched. Even without explanation, she understood. This land was full of tragedies whispered into the dust, families scattered by hunger, illness, or the merciless hands of men with guns and orders. Leary's small fingers gripped Keogh's shirt, as though terrified he might vanish if she loosened her grasp. Mara helped wrap her in the extra cloth from her satchel. The child's bones felt too light, her skin cold as snow. "She stays with us," Mara said, her voice firm despite the ache in it. Keogh hesitated. His eyes flicked from the girl to the forest beyond, weighed down by caution, by memory, by the ghosts that trailed him. But then he looked at Mara, really looked, and something in her gaze steadied him. Hope, fragile and trembling, but real. He nodded. That evening they built a small fire in a sheltered hollow. Leary clung to Mara, her tiny fingers curled in the wool shawl. Mara hummed softly, stroking the child's hair until her shivers eased. Across the fire, Keogh watched them with an expression that carried a mix of grief and astonishment, as though seeing a vision he hadn't dared believe in. A small family, born not from blood, but from survival, from mercy, from need. As Leary drifted into sleep with her head on Mara's lap, Keogh spoke quietly across the flames. "You make her safe." Mara looked up, meeting his eyes. "She deserves safety. We all do." The wind sighed through the cedars, soft, almost warm, and for the first time in her life, Mara felt the beginnings of something she had only read about in her mother's hymn book: belonging. The storm arrived at dawn, sweeping across the hills like a great white tide. Snow spilled from the sky in thick, drifting veils that blurred the horizon and softened every sound into a muted hush. Mara tightened her shawl around Leary's small shoulders, while Keogh adjusted the bindings on his makeshift walking stick. They needed shelter, real shelter, before the storm deepened. Keogh pointed toward a narrow path winding between the cedars. "Cave," he said. "Short walk." Mara nodded, trust settling easily now, like a familiar weight. They moved together through the snow, Keogh guiding them with careful steps, Mara carrying Leary against her chest. The little girl's breath puffed warm against Mara's collarbone. Her tiny fingers twisted into the fabric of the shawl. After nearly an hour of trudging through knee-deep drifts, the path opened into a rocky ridge. Tucked beneath an overhang lay a small cave, its mouth partly sheltered by a natural curtain of ivy weighed down by frost. Relief washed through Mara so suddenly she nearly sank to her knees. Inside, the cave was shallow but dry. Keogh cleared a space near the rear, sweeping aside loose stones with his good hand. Mara laid her shawl on the ground to make a soft bed for Leary, who curled up immediately, exhaustion folding her into sleep. The storm deepened outside, wind howling like distant wolves. Snow hissed against the rock walls, and the cold reached sharp fingers into the cave. Mara and Keogh worked together quietly, gathering dry branches from a sheltered ledge Keogh had found years before, building a fire, warming their hands over small but stubborn flames. When the fire finally crackled bright and warm, Mara sat back, letting her breath steady. Keogh lowered himself beside her. His shoulder was healing, but pain still tightened his jaw when he moved too quickly. Mara reached for his bandage without thinking. "Let me change it," she said. He didn't argue. She unwound the old cloth gently. The herbal paste had worked. Swelling was down, and the wound looked cleaner. Keogh watched her with that quiet patience of his, as though her touch surprised him but didn't frighten him. Outside, wind keened against the stone. Inside, the cave glowed with orange firelight and the soft rise and fall of Leary's breathing. "Thank you," Keogh murmured when she finished. "For help." Mara shook her head. "You would have done the same." His eyes held hers for a long moment. "Maybe before." After everything, I not know my heart. His voice wavered. But you show me. Again. Mara felt her pulse stumble, a fragile warmth spreading through her chest. She turned toward Leary, sleeping peacefully under the shawl, then back to Keo. We'll protect her together, she said softly. Keo nodded, the gesture slow, deliberate. Together, he echoed. As night wrapped itself around the cave like a heavy blanket, Mara leaned her head against the rough stone wall, listening to the fire pop and Leary's soft breathing. Keo shifted closer, not touching, but near enough that she felt the warmth of his presence. In that small hidden cave, surrounded by a world buried in snow, Mara realized something she had never let herself believe. She had not lost everything. Not anymore. Something new, something gentle and brave, was taking root in the quiet spaces where fear used to live. And for the first time since she'd fled into the wilderness, she felt a small spark of something that had seemed impossible. Hope. Winter settled into the hills in long, unbroken breaths, as though the world were holding still beneath a thick white silence. Days passed gently inside the sheltering walls of the cave, marked only by the rise and fall of the fire and the small routines that began to stitch their lives together like careful thread. Mara woke first each morning. She would brush snow from the cave's entrance, gather kindling, and check on Leary, always curled like a small woodland creature beneath the shawl, cheeks flushed warm from sleep. Keo would wake next, moving slowly, the stiffness of his healing shoulder easing a little more each day. Their world was small, but it felt strangely full. One morning, as pale sun filtered through the ivy curtain, Leary tugged at Mara's sleeve. "Mara," she whispered, her soft voice still thick with sleep. "Bird." A tiny winter sparrow hopped near the cave mouth, its feathers puffed against the cold. Leary crawled toward it with careful, fascinated steps. Mara smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind the girl's ear. Keo watched them with quiet amusement. "She trusts you," he said. Mara felt warmth rise in her cheeks. "She trusts you too." He shook his head. "She knows my people's words. But heart? You give her peace. That is rare." Mara looked away, blinking against the unexpected sting behind her eyes. "I don't know about that," she murmured. Keo studied her for a moment, then nodded once as though he understood things she had never spoken aloud. Later, when Keo left to check the nearby slope for edible roots, Leary climbed into Mara's lap and leaned her head against her chest. Mara wrapped her arms around the small, fragile body. "Where is your mama?" Mara asked softly, stroking the girl's hair. Leary's fingers curled in the fabric of Mara's skirt. "Gone," she whispered. The single word held a depth no child should ever know. Mara pressed her cheek to the girl's small head. "I'm here," she whispered. Leary didn't answer, but her tiny hand found Mara's and held it tight. When Keo returned with a bundle of herbs and roots, he found the two of them curled together near the fire, Leary sleeping peacefully in Mara's arms. Something softened in his eyes, a tenderness so quiet that Mara felt it without needing to look up. "We need more food," he said gently, his voice low so as not to wake the child. "Storm breaks soon. We go together." Mara nodded. Fear still flickered inside her at the thought of venturing far, but beside Keo, it felt bearable. That afternoon, they walked out into the softened world. Snow still clung to the cedars, but the storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape bright and hushed. Leary rode against Keo's back, bundled in a blanket, her small face peeking out curiously. They gathered roots, berries hidden beneath snow, and a few dried herbs clinging to the last stubborn branches. Mara laughed when Leary squealed at the crunch of snow under Keo's boots. The sound, soft and bell-like, filled a space in her chest she hadn't known was empty. As they returned to the cave at sunset, Kyo looked toward the horizon, where the sky blushed with fading gold. "Soon," he said softly, "winter open its hands. We see more." Mara followed his gaze, the cold air sharp in her lungs. For the first time, the future didn't look like a dark forest waiting to swallow her whole. It looked like a path she could walk, slowly, bravely, beside two souls who felt like the beginnings of a home. The first hint of spring arrived like a whisper, soft, almost hesitant. Tiny green shoots pushed through the white snow, trembling in the chill air. The wind carried the scent of thawing earth, a promise that the long, harsh winter was loosening its grip. Mara noticed it first as she stepped outside the cave, Leary clinging to her hand, her small face tilted toward the sky. "Look, Mara!" Leary squealed, pointing at a sprout breaking through a patch of melting snow. "Life!" Mara smiled, warmth swelling in her chest. "Yes, little one. Life always finds a way." Kyo emerged from behind the cluster of pines, carrying a small basket filled with roots and dried herbs. His eyes softened as he watched Mara and Leary examine the fragile greenery. "Spring comes slowly," he said quietly, "but it brings hope." Mara nodded, remembering the dark days when survival had been uncertain. Now, even the smallest sign of new life seemed like a miracle. The three of them walked together through the thinning snow, gathering what the land offered. Leary laughed every time she discovered a hidden shoot or a stubborn wildflower. Mara felt the sound sink deep into her soul, a soothing balm to scars she had carried silently. As evening approached, the cave felt warmer, though the fire still crackled and spit tiny sparks. Mara and Kyo worked side by side, preparing a simple meal while Leary explored nearby, humming quietly to herself. The domestic rhythm, the chopping, the stirring, the quiet hum of a child's contentment, felt foreign to Mara at first, yet it filled her with a sense of belonging she hadn't dared to imagine. After dinner, they sat together near the fire. Leary nestled between them, her eyes heavy with sleep. Mara looked at Kyo, who seemed lost in thought. "You think the storm is really over?" she asked softly. Kyo turned his gaze to the window of stars visible beyond the cave entrance. "Storms pass," he said, "but scars remain. Still, the earth heals. So can we." Mara's hand brushed against his, and for a moment, the world outside seemed distant. The warmth of the fire, the soft rise and fall of Leary's breathing, and the quiet understanding between them created a fragile but undeniable sense of home. Days passed in a gentle rhythm. Spring grew bolder with each sunrise. Buds appeared on trees, and streams freed themselves from the grip of ice. Mara found herself laughing more easily, speaking more freely, and dreaming of a future that once seemed impossible. Kyo's presence was steady, a reassurance that the pain of the past did not have to dictate the shape of tomorrow. One afternoon, as the sun spilled gold across the thawing landscape, Mara noticed Leary running ahead, chasing a butterfly with pure delight. The girl's laughter rang through the trees, mingling with the melody of birds returning from their long journeys. Mara turned to Kyo, her heart full. "Do you feel it?" she asked. He followed her gaze and smiled, a rare, quiet warmth lighting his eyes. "Yes," he said, "spring comes not just to the earth, but to us too." For the first time in years, Mara believed it. The world outside the cave no longer seemed threatening. It was alive, welcoming, and full of promise. And as she looked at Leary and Kyo, she realized something profound. Sometimes, the hardest winters make the warmth of spring all the more precious. Spring deepened into a vibrant celebration of life. The once barren landscape now shimmered with greens and blossoms, each flower and sprout a testament to endurance. Mara walked through the meadow with Leary, whose tiny hands reached out to touch every bloom. Butterflies danced lazily in the warm air, and birdsong filled the morning, a chorus of joy that seemed almost magical. "Look, Mama," Leary exclaimed, pointing at a cluster of bright yellow flowers. "They're like sunshine," Mara laughed, the sound light and free, a melody she hadn't known she could carry. "Yes, little one, sunshine just for us." Keo joined them, carrying a basket of seeds he had collected from the surrounding forest. His eyes met Mara's briefly, sharing a silent understanding. They had survived the storm, they had rebuilt their home, and now they could nurture life, not just the fragile shoots outside, but the hearts within their small family. Together, they began planting a garden beside the cave. Mara dug with her hands, feeling the warm soil crumble between her fingers, while Keo arranged seeds and roots with care. Leary danced around them, scattering petals and giggling as the wind caught her hair. Each seed planted felt like a promise, a whisper of hope for tomorrow. As the days passed, the garden flourished under their hands. Green tendrils climbed, flowers opened their faces to the sun, and even a small patch of vegetables took root. Mara often paused to watch Keo working beside her, marveling at how natural it felt to share these quiet, ordinary moments with him. There was no rush, no fear, only the gentle certainty that life could be beautiful again. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in gold and rose, Mara and Keo sat by the garden, Leary asleep between them on a blanket. Mara rested her head on Keo's shoulder, feeling the rhythm of his breath and the comforting warmth of his presence. "We've come far," Mara whispered. Keo nodded, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "And we still have far to go, but we'll go together." A soft breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers, wrapping them in a sense of peace. Mara realized that she had been holding herself back, fearing happiness as if it were fragile. But now, surrounded by life, laughter, and love, she understood that happiness was not fragile. It was resilient, growing stronger even after the harshest storms. Weeks later, they celebrated the first fruits of their garden. Sweet berries, tender herbs, and vibrant vegetables became a symbol of their journey. Leary's laughter echoed through the meadow as she sampled each bite, while Mara and Keo shared a quiet smile, their hearts swelling with gratitude and love. For Mara, the world no longer seemed daunting. It was alive, forgiving, and beautiful. The past remained a shadow, but one that no longer held power over her. She had found home, family, and a love that made every hardship worthwhile. That night, as they watched the stars twinkle above their small sanctuary, Mara whispered a simple truth. "We made it. We really made it." Keo held her hand tightly, his voice soft but certain. "Yes, and this is only the beginning." For the first time, Mara allowed herself to dream not just of survival, but of joy, love, and a life brimming with promise. And in that moment, under the starlit sky, she knew that spring had not only arrived in the world around them, it had blossomed within their hearts. The morning sun spilled golden light across the garden, illuminating blooms that danced in a gentle breeze. Mara stood at the edge of the meadow, Leary's tiny hand clasped in hers. The air was fragrant with flowers and the promise of new beginnings. Today was special, not because of a celebration or a grand event, but because life itself felt full, rich, and tender in its quiet moments. Keo emerged from the cave carrying a small wooden box. His eyes sparkled with a mixture of mischief and warmth. "I have something for you," he said softly, kneeling in the soft grass. Leary giggled, recognizing the glint of excitement in Kyo's eyes. Inside the box were delicate wildflowers, pressed and preserved, each one labeled with a date and a memory. Mara lifted them gently, her heart swelling with emotion. Each flower represented a moment they had survived, laughed, and loved, a silent record of their journey. I wanted us to remember, Kyo whispered, brushing her hair back. Even when the storms come, we'll have these moments to carry us. Mara felt tears prick the corners of her eyes. She had endured so much pain, fear, and uncertainty. But in this simple act, she realized something profound. Life was not about avoiding storms. It was about finding love and beauty, even in the hardest seasons. Leary, now perched on Mara's shoulder, pointed at the flowers and squealed. "Mama, look! They're magic!" "Yes, little one," Mara said, smiling through her tears. "Magic that grows when we care for it." The family spent the day planting more flowers, laughing as they painted wooden signs to mark their favorite spots in the garden. The sun dipped low in the sky, and the meadow shimmered in hues of orange and pink, reflecting their joy. Each moment seemed to stretch, rich and golden, as if time itself had paused to honor their happiness. As night fell, they sat together by a small fire, the glow reflecting in their eyes. Kyo wrapped an arm around Mara, and Leary nestled between them, her tiny breaths steady and content. The warmth of the fire was nothing compared to the warmth in their hearts, a warmth born from love, perseverance, and the bond that had carried them through every hardship. Mara spoke softly, her voice almost a whisper. "I used to think happiness was fragile, that it could be taken away any moment." She looked at Kyo, her eyes shining. "But now I know it's not. Happiness is here, in our hands, in our hearts. We create it together." Kyo kissed her forehead, a gentle promise of countless tomorrows. "And we will, Mara. Every day, every moment." Leary yawned, resting her head against Mara's chest. The stars twinkled overhead, countless points of light illuminating the darkness. Mara realized that life, much like the sky above, was vast, mysterious, and endlessly beautiful. And she no longer feared it, she embraced it. In that quiet night, with the fire crackling softly and the garden blooming around them, Mara understood the deepest truth. Happiness was not a destination. It was the journey they had taken together, the love they had nurtured, and the courage to hope again. And as they watched the stars, hand in hand, heart to heart, Mara, Kyo, and Leary knew one thing clearly. The storms had passed. The world was theirs to cherish. And their story, a story of resilience, love, and unbroken hope, would blossom forever. The garden, the laughter, the warmth of family, they were living proof that even after the darkest nights, life could be brighter, fuller, and more magical than they had ever imagined.